It's hard to believe we're back talking about this problem yet again, where just like Pixar, I am making a sequel to one of my very first negative videos about the studio where Pixar worried me. It's a video I didn't want to make, but also one that I have to because it's a very popular thing to do regarding complaining or explaining the most basic observations that the internet seems to coalesce around. After all, I do admit I tend to repeat myself about where the company goes or what's happening, where it's better to be proven wrong about it. Because this video is coming at a very interesting time, no doubt expanding on two recent topics I just discussed in the originals and sequels that will never stop, and the potential performance of Elio, where Pixar is still worrying me based on the results that they have to produce in the original films and the more intensified focus on sequels that will just continue if this disappointment is anything to go by. Because as of this recording, Elio has opened to a record box office low for Pixar's opening weekend at only $21 million, the lowest of any of their films, surpassing Elemental's low record of only $29 million. Granted, as we have covered in the past, that film did leg out very well, and this film does have a very similar positive reception, but still not changing the fact that it did go lower in its performance just after the success of Inside Out 2 really does not look quite good. It is not a positive sign for these originals to open like this and then be overshadowed by their sequels with Toy Story 5, Incredibles 3, and Coco 2 coming out, where they do also have a good mix of originals and Hopper and Gato in between those films, but just looking at this from a blank distance, you are going to go with those sequels as the big hitters instead. The same problem I just talked about and why originals don't work anymore because of our spending habits choosing not to go with that in this day and age, where the real worry is not on Pixar being a dead studio anymore because they've already proven they succeed beyond all of our expectations with those past two films, but the disappointing reactions that people have now with their newer movies that are just failing to impress and they making sequels out of it instead, where I'm just concerned at the amount of people simply writing off films like Elio as bad based on its style and substance because of the poor performance, even as they remain to be positive movies. Granted, again, there's also still many opinions that people have, and you're fine to say that it is a bad movie with its style that isn't that interesting, looking more childish if you think it that way, by judging by what I've seen online by these abysmal numbers. Which I do have to admit, on the other hand, even as I do like this own animation style compared to many other films they have done, it still does not look very appealing regardless, as to my own fears originally knowing that this film wouldn't open that strong, debating if I should have seen it all since its performance wasn't going to be that great to begin with, where this remains to be the film that was supposed to release in 2024 over Inside Out 2. Or even in the same year as that until they delayed that due to issues with the writing, what went on with Disney back in 2023, and other numerous factors that just exist and put this in a negative spot. Which, speaking of Disney too, since the time of Wish, I'd say this could extend to them like everyone else with their originals, almost wanting this video to be more of a broader Disney marketing problem. But I just thought it was better to focus on this studio that has still tried to be themselves, but external reactions are just making it difficult to see it that way. Because this brings up a very good point, that Coco was actually their last original success, gaining over $800 million back in 2017 before Onward got shut out by COVID and everything else happened. I mean, I really don't want to mention it again, but it's also very important to clarify that Pixar's expectations were shoved onto Disney Plus during everything in the COVID era with the trio of films we talked about from Soul to Turning Red, and how niche down their ideas were for that time, where audiences expected to be on there, and how Lightyear just didn't impress once they returned. Those were stupid decisions that even employees criticized at the time because they played a very long game with the streaming platform because of COVID and had people use this as a better way to see their projects rather than theatrical, as it has been proven. That why should anyone see their films of any quality if it's just going to be on here instead? Where sadly, when it comes to these failures and such reactionary behavior, things have to be cut as well, like the people who were laid off after this movie failed, or even more to save costs before Inside Out 2 came out, with the work on that production that also coincided with Elio being reworked too, putting more problems as more people had questions about what to do now, what exactly we should expect, where technically that was also chalked up that they wanted to do less of the streaming series content and more transfer it back to theatrical once again because that's what they wanted. They wanted the expectations to be back because they did admit they made the mistake of releasing all of this on Disney Plus and never getting the actual projects the benefit of the doubt of where you could expect it from, and why they failed in the first place because that's something you could already get on here, where you can't blame them for fully trying when you also know that compared to other studios, they still produce produce in-house, just like Disney themselves, back here in the States where they are located rather than everyone else going offshore like Illumination and now DreamWorks for Universal, where when people question their big budgets that cause them to lose money, it's still important that they also still work there because of the teams they have. Something I want to factor into this topic because I also can worry that it could change considering that Disney now has the Vancouver studio that also produced Moana 2 for the series originally. That their big budgets can be reduced like so many people clamor for or concerned about, but only if they moved outside rather than paying here within, and we lose what history we have once there. I mean, I'm by no means an expert at all of talking about this and how business works with the best method, but I just care that at least somebody here is trying to stay with what they built, what legacy they've instructed that teaches us that I've admired my whole entire life, where it sadly just doesn't help their case to continue when their next consecutive original film opens lower than the next, stretching that definition to include Lightyear in that regard as a spin-off under that roof of films that are opening lower and lower, from going from 50 million to 30 million and almost 20 million as a result of this, even though Elemental again just doubled Lightyear's overall box office when people saw that was good. Again, this gets us back to the critical reception of this film that mostly has the same review reaction as Elemental with that A Cinema score, but also opening lower than another big franchise movie, and how it's not assured that it can be quite as successful as that. That the lower you go, the harder it gets to make the movie perform, even if it will at all. Which I do hope by the end of this year that it does exactly just yet, but when you look at the international performance compared to Elemental prior, it's just a much tougher case because of what reaction it gave. For example, to put this into perspective, it did open in less markets at the time for Elemental, where Elio actually opened in most markets at the time, a factor that I mentioned back when Korea's box office run became an insane story to Elemental, becoming one of their most watched animated films of all time due to the subject matter and cultural background of the director, which Pixar does a great job at connecting people when you look back at Luca or again Coco and how Mexico took a great liking to that film, only just beaten by Inside Out 2 with its cross even matching the likes of Endgame in the country, where no doubt Coco 2 would actually surpass that, but how it's still limited to one idea rather than the next, because Korea or Mexico isn't going to react the same way to Elio because of that, of where it's more set in its other setting with the military bases and going to outer space, where it has to more rely on a broader spectrum of an audience in order to see that through. For example, the best case scenario for this film would be if it matched Elemental's run, its multiplier for that box office, where it would only get up to 350 million if it matched that performance, still way lower than Elemental itself, but better than Lightyear and The Good Dinosaur barely, which does not actually say that much. Meaning its best hypothetical scenario still does not make this film a positive hit for Pixar when you compare the time of Inside Out and Coco and all of their Golden Age original films. It's just not going to match that period no matter what you think, and that's the reality of the situation. And it's something that you have to point to the fact that it's based on an idea that wasn't very marketable as you think compared to those past Pixar originals. We did have some worry before Elemental, but when you see what that film did, it did make more sense to its choice and style for that very studio. But in comparison to this was something that was more generic when it came to sci-fi concepts. The adventure that never told people what it really had in comparison to the worlds that they built before, Out of the Sea, In the World of Monsters, or just toys, where it just became harder and harder, where marketing is sort of impossible to do with something with this, despite the wealth that Disney has to do it. That there is a problem that they can't seem to actually promote these projects right, but also they are big enough where it doesn't even matter. But that's not just going to get everyone to see it. That's just not how it works, despite appearing everywhere sometimes, where it relies mostly on the interest of what it's about to actually see it. It's not a free card no matter what you do, where it just comes down to those people willing to actually watch it, where apparently it's also just not enough even if you do make a good film, because people just want to actually spend time on something that they can trust, which worries me greatly to translate over into future projects like Hoppers, which does have an interesting concept placing a person in the body of a beaver in a world similar to the classics that I've mentioned, but also not sure if that plot is also going to confuse people and scare them away to be disinterested in that. Or even their next original film, Ingato, that obviously deals with the black cat in Venice, directed by the same guy who did Luca, that has an interesting Italian cultural touch. It's all still way too early to judge those films based on these facts, and history can change in the course of events, but how I can't really rely on any logic of what the future holds when it's consistently being dragged lower and lower by each original release, or even factor the suggestion that some of the tone and animation might be a little less adult oriented as the approach was, and more kid friendly if that definition makes sense, which also shouldn't be the case as other studios have made films for that. I will say on the other hand, I really still trust Pixar to make the best choices, but I'm not sure if I can trust myself or others that we would go see it or even know it exists, because that's how it is nowadays. It just doesn't help that these big studios are just willing to release their big remakes during the same time, affecting families' choice and perception for movies, going if they want to see this rather than that, and that's the case that affected their past films released during the same time frame, that they're just thrown out there because they can, where it also ruins it because of the more familiar franchises that people will gravitate towards. It's a conflict that makes our arguments a bit messy because you honestly don't know what to expect anymore. The back and forth nature between one movie doing so well and the other one being seen as a big failure just makes this entire picture feel so unsustainable by modern standards and growing opinions. I mean, not every film should be a billion-dollar hit at all, but it also shouldn't constantly be failures on the other hand because of their budgets or just simple ideas because they exist the way that they do. It's a frustrating desire to want to see them succeed but also fail at the same time because of where they've been or what they do rather than the best that the original films and ideas can offer, and how it unfortunately rewards these stupid opinions because they don't like what they see on a surface level. And I just don't want those surface observations to enter the mindset of the studio itself, where we lose all of this valuable wealth of storytellers that made these films the way that they wanted to do, and how as a result, others just seem to make more money than they do because of these simple ideas that they put that people seem interested in, even if it offers less of an experience than any of the film that they have produced and are pretty stupid movies when you actually think about it. Again, like I said in previous videos, it is on both the audience and studio themselves to make an effort to make these things work, to see if something is greater than what could be, where you could see the studio market these ideas better to its audience, or even not pass judgment on something just because you don't like the way that it looks. That we needed to continue if you don't want the sequel path to be the way that it is, and to have a brand that still produces the content it needs. But to really close things out, I just want to say that maybe I'm really overacting to things the way that they are, just like many other things I've read online, inspired by these weirdly bizarre Reddit takes that it's just bad because it looks too generic or something else, despite the contrary opinion that says it good. And I just really don't know what to think anymore based on those facts, where it just goes up and down the scale and we have our opinions that say this happens and then the other thing actually happens. That I just want to know or feel like they won't go changing who they are compared to others just because of one mistake that could be made from time to time, to slowly claw their way out of an abysmal image that says that we don't want to see you anymore because it's just too plain. If not, it's just only a matter of time before those Pixar remakes come in and we get more movies produced in France just because they can and lose the value that they once stood for. That I'm just worried about everything going for the worse because nobody wants to see it anymore. But if I know anything like Disney itself, and I've done many times in the past, proving back and forth that they're all up and down the scale just like I do with these videos, is that they will come out even stronger. Where it was just a minor freakout that proves out later on how great these observations really are about things. And that's all I can really say in this sequel. I'm all done. Goodbye.